All right, good afternoon. Bear with me. I actually have quite a bit of stuff for you. Some of it may be newsy, but let's not get our hopes up. The Secretary General and the Special Coordinator for the Middle East Peace Process, Tor Wennesland, are continuing their constant contacts with leaders from across the region, focusing on ways to end suffering and prevent further escalation. In the last few days, Mr. Wennesland met with President Herzog, Senior Ministry of Defense, and Israeli defense officials, as well as US and EU envoys, among others. Back here this morning, the Emergency Relief Coordinator, Martin Griffiths, briefed member states on the humanitarian situation in Gaza. He talked about the despair he saw as he spoke to families of Israeli hostages and families in Gaza who have lost loved ones and their homes. Mr. Griffiths said, we have seen unfold in Israel and in the occupied Palestinian territory over the last 26 days is nothing short of a blight on our collective conscience. He said there are intense humanitarian negotiations involving Israel, Egypt, the United States, and the UN, with more than 300 trucks having moved into Gaza as of yesterday. More than 100 trucks moved into Gaza yesterday alone, he added, yet that remains far less than the 500 truckloads of goods that moved into Gaza every day prior to the current crisis. Mr. Griffiths called once more on the immediate release of all hostages and stressed the need to keep civilian infrastructure safe from harm, and he reiterated our call for humanitarian pauses. Lynn Hastings, the resident and humanitarian coordinator in the occupied Palestinian territory, also briefed but via video conference. She said the humanitarian impact of the attacks in Gaza have been catastrophic, with more than 9,000 people have been killed in Gaza, and that's according to the Ministry of Health there. Thomas White from the UN Relief and Works Agency, UNRWA, briefed from Rafah, and he discussed the worsening situation as fuel is running out, noting that we could soon have a situation where raw sewage gushes out into Gaza streets. He paid tribute to the work of UNRWA staff are doing in very dangerous condition. And sadly, just to recall, 72 staff from UNRWA have been killed so far, to date, excuse me. Still on the occupied Palestinian territory, the Office of the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs says we, along with our partners, will release a flash update on Monday covering the remainder of the year. The $1.2 billion appeal aims to support 2.7 million people. That's the entire Gaza population and 500,000 people in the West Bank. The original appeal that was launched on October 12th asked for $294 million to support 1.3 million people. The situation has grown increasingly desperate since then. The revised flash appeal will outline the need for food, water, healthcare, shelter, hygiene, and other urgent priorities following the massive bombardments in Gaza. Update on another crisis we're following closely, which is our peacekeeping mission in Mali. The convoy we've been updating you on, which is traveling from Kidal to Gao, again suffered an attack. This is part of the withdrawal process. Earlier today, the convoy hit another improvised explosive device about 3 kilometers northeast of Anefis village in the Kidal region. 7 peacekeepers have been injured and are being medically evacuated. Yesterday, as you'll recall, 8 other peacekeepers were injured in similar incidents. They are now reported to be in stable condition. This is the 4th time that the convoy has been impacted by an IED since it left the UN base in Kidal on the 31st of October. And a quick update for you from Sudan, which, as you know, is another major humanitarian crisis. An update on our efforts to deliver life-saving assistance. Our colleagues at OCHA says they facilitated an 8-truck convoy of food and medical supplies to South Kordofan's capital, Kadiguli, the first since the intense fighting broke out in April. This is a positive development, but we, of course, need sustained access to continue delivering to people in need across the country. However, the situation remains extremely distressing, specifically in Darfur, and especially for women and girls. The UN Human Rights Office says they're deeply alarmed by reports they've received of women and girls being abducted and held in inhuman, degrading, and slave-like conditions in areas controlled by the Rapid Support Forces in Darfur, where they are allegedly forcibly married and held for ransom. Credible information from survivors, witnesses, and other sources suggests that more than 20 women and girls have been taken, but the number could be higher. The UN Human Rights Office restated the High Commissioner's call on senior officials of both the Sudanese Armed Forces and the Rapid Support Forces, as well as any other armed groups affiliated with them, to unequivocally condemn these vile acts and issue urgently clear instructions to their subordinates demanding zero tolerance for sexual violence. They must also ensure the abducted women and girls are promptly released and provided with the necessary support, including medical and psychosocial care, that all alleged cases are fully and promptly investigated, with those found responsible held accountable and brought to justice. Turning to the Democratic Republic of the Congo, our humanitarian colleagues tell us that in October alone, last month, more than 300,000 men, women, and children were driven from their homes by escalating violence in North Kivu province in the eastern part of the Congo. This brings the total number of people displaced in the eastern part of the country to more than 6 million people. The eastern provinces are also facing continued outbreaks of cholera and measles. Despite the volatile situation, we, along with our partners, have reached some 3 million people with humanitarian aid, including 1.9 million with food assistance in the region. However, as we've said on several occasions, access remains very much of a challenge due to the recent and ongoing violence in Beni. This has forced many humanitarian workers to temporarily suspend their operations, leaving more than 140,000 people unable to receive assistance. This year's $2.3 billion humanitarian response plan is only 36% funded. We need more money. Turning to Ukraine, I can tell you that we strongly condemn the latest wave of Russian attacks against critical infrastructure in various parts of the country, which reportedly resulted in injuries among the civilian population, including children, and caused damage to civilian, residential, and commercial buildings. We are concerned about the escalation of such incidents and their impact on the lives of civilians, especially at the onset of the winter period. We reiterate in the clearest terms that attacks against civilian and civilian infrastructure, are prohibited under international humanitarian law, and they must stop immediately. Also, just on a humanitarian update from Ukraine, our colleagues there tell us that the attacks this week have destroyed energy facilities, schools, hospitals, and other public sites. The Kherson region in the south and Donetsk region in the east were particularly affected. Kharkiv City was also attacked last night. Our partner NGOs are already on site providing psychological support and shelter material to people whose homes were damaged in the attacks. We and our partners continue to provide critical aid to frontline communities. Today, an interagency humanitarian convoy delivered vital aid to about 1,600 people who remain on the front line towns of Kharkiv in the Zaporizhzhia region. The aid includes medicine, household hygiene kits, as well as blankets, mattresses, solar lamps, sleeping bags, and food aid is also continuing to be distributed. This year alone, we and our partners have delivered 14 convoys to frontline communities in Zaporizhzhia region, providing essential support to more than 30,000 people living near the southern front. There have been 96 humanitarian convoys to frontline areas since the beginning of this year. Ahead of winter, humanitarian workers are distributing vital items such as thermal blankets, mattresses, and portable heaters. We and our partners are also appealing for $435 million to deliver winter assistance to more than 1.7 million people across Ukraine through March of 2024, which obviously covers the winter. Couple of travel announcements for you. Tomorrow, our Deputy Secretary General, Mina Mohammed, will be heading to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, where she will participate in the opening ceremony of the inaugural International Conference on Women in Islam. This is organized by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Organization of Islamic Cooperation in Jeddah. The conference aims to facilitate dialogue about the position of women in Islam, encompassing both religion and cultural aspects and promoting Muslims' women's rights. During her visit, she will meet with senior government officials from the Islamic Development Bank and other stakeholders. She'll be back in New York on the 7th, on Tuesday. Jean-Pierre Lacroix, our head of peace operations, is wrapping up his 3-day visit to Cyprus today. He had discussions with leaders of both sides of the island regarding recent developments within the buffer zone and the work of the UN peacekeeping force to maintain stability on the island. He also engaged with civil society representatives, including women and youth representatives. He also went to the Pila Pil Plateau and stressed that the implementation of the understanding that was reached recently is essential. In addition, he visited the Committee on Missing Persons and met with some of its members. Assistant Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs Joyce Msuya is in Mozambique, where she visited the northern province of Cabo Delgado yesterday and today. We, along with our partners, are continuing to provide life-saving assistance to people impacted by the conflict there. Ms. Msuya met with women and children and men who've returned to the district of Mocimboa da Praia after fleeing violence that started in 2017. Nearly 3/4 of the 175,000 returnees in the districts reside in areas where basic infrastructure, such as school, health centers, and water facilities, have yet to be restored. A reminder that more than 2 million people in Mozambique need humanitarian assistance to cope with the impact of the conflict, climate change, extreme weather events, including Cyclone Freddy earlier this year. We and our partners have reached now some 1.5 million people in the country with some form of humanitarian assistance in the first part of this year. To do more, we need more funding. In 2023, Humanitarian Appeal for Mozambique for $513 million is just over 1/3 funded. Our response plan for Cyclone Freddy, floods, and cholera is even less resourced, having received over just 16% of the $138 million that we need. Food price index, our friends at FAO report today that the international food commodity prices have declined moderately in October, down 0.5% from September, with the index for dairy products the only one to see a bit of rise. According to the latest crop prospects and food situation report also published today, FAO says persisting and intensifying conflict are aggravating food insecurity, moderating international food commodity prices, and are being countered by weak currency in many low-income countries. Sunday is which day, besides being Sunday? It is a marathon. I will not be running, I hate to tell you. It is World Tsunami Awareness Day. In his message, the Secretary General says, early warning for all initiative, which aims to protect every person on Earth by 2027, prioritizes the needs of the most vulnerable. It requires an investment of $3.1 billion, about 50 cents for each person to be covered, which is a small price to pay to protect people. Monday, we will be joined virtually from Paris by Guilherme Canella de Souza Godoy, UNESCO's head of freedom of expression and safety of journalists. And just want to flag too, also on Sunday, the UN Office of Drugs and Crime, in coordination with the UN Assistance Mission in Afghanistan, will launch its 2023 Afghan Opium Survey, always an interesting document. The survey examines the latest findings and emerging trends of the illicit opium trade and economy. It will be the second report since the de facto authorities banned the cultivation of opium poppy and all narcotics in April of last year. The 2022 harvest was largely exempted from the decree, meaning this survey is the first to examine trends since the enforcement of the ban. I think the advanced copies have been shared with you. Maggie, then Edie.
A lot of bad news for a Friday, Steph.
Yeah.
A lot. And there's more. After meeting with Secretary of State Blinken, Prime Minister Netanyahu said there would be no humanitarian pauses until the hostages are released. How is this going to impact the UN's work?
Well, it's we will continue. We've seen the statements. We will obviously continue to push for humanitarian goods to get in. I mean, I don't. We couldn't be any clearer as to what the humanitarian situation in Gaza is, and the need for more aid to come in. Edie.
This time Maggie beat me to that the exact same question.
Yeah.
But also, can you tell us what the Secretary General is going to do now? Is he planning any future travels? Who's he been talking to?
The travels will. I mean, let me put it this way: I have no travel to announce in the immediate. I think he will be here next week. We also have his annual meeting of the Chief Executive Board, which will happen next week, which will be formally announced a little later, which will be an occasion for him also to have very focused discussion, not only on the years ahead, but on the situation, especially the humanitarian situation now. And he remains, I'm not going to go into the details of his calls, but he remains in contact with a number of people.
Is the Chief Executive's Board meeting going to be here in New York?
It will be in New York. Yeah, the fall session's always here in New York. Deji.
They asked some parts of my question, actually.
I don't
Okay.
complain to me
But-
about who
but
asking
yeah,
question.
Yeah, everybody's talking about the humanitarian pauses. But as far as I remember, the Secretary General is actually asking for humanitarian ceasefire, which is to some degrees actually different from the humanitarian pauses which led to the hostages. So what does the Secretary General's idea on these pauses for releasing the hostages? Do you think that would
first of all,
contribute to a
I think
humanitarian
the Secretary
ceasefire?
General has been very clear, is that all the things he's been talking about, which is, halt in the fighting to get humanitarian aid, the release of hostages immediately, unconditionally, should not be linked, and they should not be used as bargaining chips.
So, since we have already talked about hostages, is there any update on the negotiations of
Nothing to
releasing
share
the
with you.
hostages?
Nothing to share
What
with
about the situation in the border area between Lebanon and Israel? Do you have any?
I mean, they've been exchange of
Yeah.
fire across the blue line. Today, we will reiterate our message to avoid any sort of further escalation in what is already a very tense area. Amélie, then Sylvia.
Thanks, Steph. On Mali, it's been, the convoy has been hit almost every day by an IED. So what is MINUSMA, do they believe that the convoy is specifically targeted on its way to Gao, or it is just that the road is?
It's hard, let me put it this way. I think it's hard to it's hard to tell, right? I've not seen any reports where they have seen people leave IDs, whether or not these are IDs that have been there for a long time, whether people know that the convoy is coming this way, because frankly, there aren't 1,000 ways to get from Kidal to Gao when you're dealing with that many trucks. So the road, it's clear what road they will use. We can only speak to the impact that it's having, which is a continuous threat to our peacekeeping colleagues.
Just a follow-up. Considering some previous convoy were driving really, really slow, like 1 or 2 kilometers an hour, how many more days will they take for them to reach Gao? And so how many more days are going to be
I
at
think
risk of
my
being
sense
hit?
is it was about 4 days worth of travel. So hopefully they will arrive sometime this weekend. And it's clear that every time there's such an attack, it delays the convoy further. Sylviane, Dawn, and then Caitlin.
Thank you, Stéphane. And on the south of Lebanon, the UNIFIL is caught now in the heart of the tension between Lebanon and Israel. Is there any plan for the Secretary General or for Mr. Lacroix to go to Lebanon and visit UNIFIL?
If I have any travel to announce, I don't think there's any plan for the Secretary General in the immediate term. For Mr. Lacroix, I will keep you we will keep you posted.
There is another, the 1701 will be, the new report will be discussed on November 22nd. Is there a new, can we have some more information about the UNIFIL
Well, I mean,
engagement? Are there new engagement rules for during
new
this war?
engagement rules?
Yeah.
No, not no.
Put in
There's
place?
there are no new rules of engagement as far as I know. Okay.
Okay.
Dawn, then Caitlin, and then I'll get to the rest.
Thanks, Steph. I have two questions, one on Syria and one on Gaza. For Syria, there was a suicide drone attack in Homs on October 5th. But since then, the Syrian regime hasn't let up on its attacks in northwest Syria. While I can't speak for Syrians, when I go on social media, a lot of Syrians that I follow say that they feel forgotten by the world. So I wanted to know what would be the Secretary General's message to the people in northwest Syria who are still suffering. And then my second question has to do with the Secretary General's level of confidence in the crop of world leaders that we have today and their ability to deal with the situations that we have in Gaza and Ukraine. Does he believe that these people, and I mean, you could think about like the P5 of this Security Council, are they up to the task? Do they have what it takes to deal with what's happening in the world today? Thanks. Why?
Listen. No. That's not. It's not the answer. The answer is that they have no choice. We have no choice. We all have to be up to the task. While there may be not as much political progress as we would like on the Syria track, as outlined in what is called for by the Security Council resolution, the United Nations, embodied by the humanitarian staff that remains in Syria, has not forgotten the Syrian people, has not abandoned the Syrian people. We continue to deliver aid in whichever way we can, whether that's cross-line or cross-border, and we continue to be there with the Syrian people. And I think, as we have from this podium quite often, not only express our concern, but condemn the violence civilians are subjected to on a regular basis in many, many parts of the country.
Can I just follow up
yeah.
really quick on the Baba Hawa crossing? I believe that renewal is coming up, but it's a secret renewal.
Yeah, let me
An
find,
understanding,
let
so
me see if I can find answer to that secret. Caitlin, Sarifa, and then Pam.
Thank you. Does UN have any comment, or was it aware of this ambulance convoy that was reportedly struck by Israeli fire in Gaza as it was heading towards Rafah?
No, I haven't seen anything from here, but I will check.
Also on Gaza, do you have any updated numbers on how many UN staffers have been able to leave Gaza through the Rafah crossing, foreign nationals, and have they been replaced?
There is a rotation. It's a small number. I think it's about less than 10 of the rotation, but that is ongoing.
Been replaced.
So yes, some of them have been replaced. Yep. Pam. Oh, sorry, and then Sarifa. Sorry, I apologize.
Separate question, but just as a follow-up to this question, total number of UNRWA in Gaza now, about 1,000, I thought you said?
No, I've always said about 13,000 UN staff in Gaza.
13,000
Yes,
still in Gaza?
Well, I mean, they are, the vast majority of them are Palestinians who live and work in Gaza.
Okay, and only 10 or so have
But those are
swapped out.
internationals, and they're not, they're from different agencies that are also, that operate in Gaza.
Okay, now my question, which is just turning to Ukraine. There have been some announcements by Ukraine that a Black Sea corridor is still working a little bit. What's the status? Is the JCC in Istanbul still there?
I mean, the structure is still there, and our efforts to revive the grain deal and fully implement the MOU are also continuing.
All right, thank you.
Terrific. You've been very patient. Thank you.
No problem at all. Thank you, Steph. So the hospitals in Gaza are continuing to be a target despite all calls by the United Nations. And there are reports and images that Israel has targeted the vicinity of 3 hospitals today, Al-Shifa, Al-Quds, and the Indonesian hospital. I want to ask, is the UN working on a plan, an initiative to enforce international law and stop Israel from targeting health facilities, basically?
Well, first of all, we continue to call for the full respect of international law, which includes the point that hospitals should not be used in any part of combat. But, you know, like in any conflict, and we talk, I mean, just today we've spoken about, you know, what's going on in Gaza. We've spoken about what's the horrific stories from Sudan. We've spoken about Ukraine. We keep calling for the respect of international humanitarian law, but in none of these cases is the UN the one with the fingers on the trigger, right? So I think that hopefully answers your question. Deji.
Sorry,
And
I just got this news.
If you just got it, I didn't get it.
The Russian foreign minister said that the foreign minister of Russia, Lavrov, has already sent a letter to the Secretary General on de-ratifying the nuclear test ban treaty. Does the Secretary General receive that letter, and what message does the Secretary General have for both Russia and United
I don't know if
States?
the actual letter has been received, but we've obviously seen the news, which the Secretary General deeply regrets, and he deeply regrets Russia's revocation of the ratification of the CTBT. He's consistently stressed the need for entry into force of the treaty, which is you know, one of the main pillars of the global disarmament and non-proliferation architecture. He strongly urges all states that have not yet ratified the CTBT to do so without reservation or condition, especially those whose ratification is required for the treaty's entry into force. In the interim, he calls on all nuclear weapon states to publicly reaffirm their moratorium against nuclear testing and their commitment to the treaty. Celia.
Steph, in the state of the world right now, do you think it's wise for the Security Council members to go on a retreat trip?
Celia, I have.
Like
First
to
of all,
know-
I have no. We have no authority on what the Security Council does. We fully believe that Security Council members can do more than one thing at the same time. And frankly, perhaps meeting in a retreat and meeting off-site can have positive developments.
You really believe so?
Well, if I didn't believe it, I wouldn't say it. I tend to believe what I say. Yes, sir.
Thank you. Eric Peters with Kyoto News. Thanks, Stéphane. I was wondering if, so the IDF spokesperson announced that they had encircled Gaza City, and I was wondering if aid can still get in?
No, I mean, we've been, it's been very difficult for us to access the northern part of Gaza, and as we've said, we're not able to deliver the humanitarian services we need to do that in those areas.
So nothing can reach Gaza City right now?
That's my understanding from UNRWA. They've not been able to deliver the humanitarian aid they need to the areas in the north.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Sorry, the microphone. Okay.
Finally, I got it. Thank you for doing this briefing on a daily basis. We've heard so many characterization for what's happening in Gaza. War crimes, genocide, blight. How does the General Secretary characterize it officially and formally?
Well, read what he's been saying. Read what we've been saying. I mean, we've been characterizing using different words since the beginning. But I mean, I think his characterizations are reflected in his very public remarks, whether to the press or whether to the Security Council. Tony.
Thank you, Steph. So I remember at the very beginning of this briefing, you started with the Secretary General contacts and Wennesland, what they are doing and working with different parties, but that wasn't enough information for us. Are you able to share more about this, like, very specific part of the UN role in this crisis?
I mean, our role is, I would say, is multi-pronged. We are continuing to speak to key interlocutors, obviously.
Who are they?
Palestinian interlocutors, Israeli interlocutors, Qataris, Americans, Egyptians, and others. There are a lot of different member states and entities that partially hold the key to solving and stopping what is going on. We do not, we share as much as we feel comfortable sharing so as not to endanger the policies that, I mean, the issues we're trying to move forward. Let me go to the screen to those who haven't had a chance, then I'll come back. Abdelhamid.
Thank you, Stéphane. I have a couple of questions. I hope you will be patient with me. First, the question about targeting the hospitals, it has been asked, so I won't repeat that. In the West Bank, Stéphane,
We've lost you, Abdelhamid.
Palestinians were killed. Israeli stormed into this. And yet the UN, we have not heard any word about what's going on in the West Bank in the last few days, especially about this, what happened in Jenin this today. Leaving 10 people
Abdelhamid, I think, I think it's I would encourage you to really look at the transcripts of past briefings, because we have spoken about what the violence in the West Bank. We have condemned the violence by the settlers. We have underscores Israel's responsibilities to ensure the safety of all people living in the West Bank. So we have spoken about that, and we continue to do so. What is your next question, sir?
My next question, on October 30th, Mr. Wennesland had the time to go visit two Israeli settlements inside Kfar Alza and Be'eri, and he sat with the families of what he said suffered appalling acts of terror by Hamas against women, children, and whole family. That's what his words. I've been asking you, Stéphane, for many times, why he never visited a Palestinian family? Why he didn't visit those towns that were destroyed by the settlers, including Hawara.
I think Mr. Wennesland has also spoken to Palestinian families. I would remind you that Martin Griffiths was also there. He met with families of Israeli hostages. He also spoke to families in Gaza. So I don't agree with your characterization. If you have a third question, go ahead. Otherwise, I'll move on.
Just you give me one example that he visited a family.
I do not have his personal agenda. I do not have his personal agenda with me, but I can assure you that it's whether it's Mr. Wennesland, his colleagues. I mean, we try to be there with people who have suffered and who continue to suffer. Okay, let's go.
My last question.
Yep.
My last question. Mr. Hassan Nasrallah gave a long speech today. He's the head of Hezbollah. First, did the UN follow that speech?
Yes,
he said that he considered himself a part of what's going on. And he said he will escalate, depends on Israel. If Israel escalates, he would increase also his involvement. Do you have any comment on this?
We're fully aware of the speech delivered by Mr. Nasrallah, which obviously, like many others, were watching. I'm not going to go into an analysis or comment of everything that he said. I would just reiterate our comment and what we've said earlier today, and what we've been saying, is the need for all those who have the power to do so to avoid any sort of escalation along the blue line, and to avoid and to cease all hostile activities across the blue line, and as well as escalatory rhetoric. Maggie.
Two follow-ups, Steph. You mentioned on Monday that OCHA will increase the appeal for Gaza to 1.2 billion. Can we
Yes, ma'am.
expect a donors conference to
I
do
don't
that?
think, we asked this morning, I don't think there will be an actual event, but it will be a release. But we hope that even without a conference, donors will donate.
Okay, and second, okay, so much is made of language at the UN and diplomatic language. So the Secretary General has been calling repeatedly for humanitarian ceasefire. Today, Mr. Griffiths called it a humanitarian pause. You repeated that at the podium, pause. The Americans have been saying no to a ceasefire, okay to a pause. Is that is your change in language a reflection of that because you don't think you can get better than a pause? Can you explain
I think
why?
we are trying to get as much as we can, and I will leave it at that.
So you think that's all that's realistic?
I will leave it at that. Edie, then Seraphim, yeah, and then Dawn.
Going back to Mali, as I recall, one of the big issues was that the authorities in Mali would not allow any aerial cover for the convoy. Is that still the case?
I mean, we've had a lot of challenges getting clearance for flights. We had some medevac flights, but we're not operating as many flights as we should be able to operate in order to up the safety of our peacekeepers who are moving on the ground.
And is there any estimate of how many more days it's going to take?
We hope they get to Gao by the weekend, the end of the weekend. Seraphim and then Dawn.
Thank you again, Steph. Just took me a minute to process what you said. Obviously, the UN is not the one with the trigger on its hand, but I'm not asking this to undermine the United Nations, not at all.
I'm not taking
but I
this
just,
as
yeah,
such,
I just
yeah.
want to really know what can the UN do besides calling, to stop the hostilities or condemning the brutalities, because I think there's a huge expectation from the UN, not just from people on the ground, but from all around the world.
I think the question is which UN you're talking about, right? I can only speak for part of that, and that's the Secretary General. The Secretary General, his authority, in a sense, is in his voice and the voice of his officials, and we continue to call on this and continue to push it publicly and continue to push it privately. There are other parts, legislative parts in the UN, that could be doing more to ensure an end to this conflict. Dawn.
Thanks, Steph. In recent days, the U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has been talking about this idea of the day after in Gaza. And it's just very strange to think of the day after as if you snap your fingers, it's the day after. And I understand that the two-state solution is politically popular. I don't know if that's too far of a stretch to say. I know the Secretary General supports it. But what we're dealing with here is two groups of people, Palestinians and Israelis, who've been traumatized. Mm-hmm. I'm not here to judge who more than the other. There's a lot of psychological tension there. With a two-state solution, what can be done to bring these people, how are you going to ask these people to now live together in two states when we're talking about generations of trauma? When Antony Blinken talks about the day after, it's like, whoa, whoa, whoa. We're talking about generations of trauma.
Right, I mean, there will be a need for a day after. There will be a need for reconciliation. There will be a need to address the violence. There'll be a need to address the trauma, and I think the international community should work in unison to ensure that goal. on that word, I've scored my last goal, and I'm. Oh, sorry. That I thought I was hoping that was a joke, but no. Go ahead, Caitlin. Yeah, yeah.
Can we get the Secretary General to do a briefing if he's going to be here all week?
Yeah.
No,
Yes, it's on my to-do list. You're welcome.